Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coco and Daltz.
Episode 16.
And I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz.
And so this week, Coco, what are we going to talk about on the podcast?
We're going to go back to the David Letterman Netflix well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad that I watched those with you.
Unless you had something else planned?
No, that's good.
Okay. All right,
good.
awesome.
That was
Cool.
what we discussed in the meeting before this.
Our staff meeting.
With our staff meeting in the boardroom at our luxurious...
McMansion.
The big floor that we have here in the tall building in downtown Connecticut, where we have our offices.
With the digital scroll around the room that we were talking about in that one episode that I can't remember.
Like the one in Times Square. You're
Yes.
talking about that kind of same ticker type thing.
Because we're professionals.
Because we have all the equipment here. We do. So the episodes, we watched Letterman's new show.
My Next
newish
Guest.
show, I guess.
Once a month on Netflix. It's called My Next Guest Needs No Introduction.
And who are the two guests that we watched?
So we finally caught up on the Malala episode, which was released in March, and we also watched the Jay-Z episode, which was released this month in April, if you're listening to it in real time, which I don't know why you wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. It's fresh on the shelf. You want to take it off there before it gets stale.
Right.
Just like in the grocery store.
Right, like bread and such.
So here's a question. Does Jay-Z go by Jay-Z in Canada?
Oh, you should, maybe you should tweet him and ask.
Well, yeah, next time I'm up there, I'll ask around.
Okay. Well, plenty of people in the Canadian journalism industry. You could ask them.
I should. I know, because when they used to have sports cars that had a Z at the end of the name, like the 240Z, in Canada it was called the 240Z.
You know what? I bet if we went to, like the CBC's website, I'm sure when Jay-Z and Beyonce had their twins like 6 or 9 months ago, there was probably a news segment on it, and we could probably watch that on the YouTube and see how it's pronounced.
So what we'll do for this podcast is you'll call him Jay-Z and I'll call him Jay-Z. How's that sound?
Okay.
All right. So we saw Jay-Z and Malala on those episodes. What were your impressions, first of all, Coco, of each?
I feel like I've talked too much. Why don't you talk?
See, now you're passing the puck, as we say.
Speaking of Canada.
So, full disclosure, I started watching the Malala episode when you were not around. I think you were probably working hard and I was goofing off in the house. I mean, in the large...
in the boardroom.
In the boardroom. And I started watching it and I stopped it in about 10 or 15 minutes in, because I just thought it was... So here's Malala, who's gone through this horrible thing, shot by the Taliban, almost dies, and the paradox with Letterman making wisecracks didn't really... It wasn't appropriate to me. I was kind of...
Oh, okay.
I was kind of put off by it, and I'm about as big a Letterman fan as you can get, from dating back from the days when I used to watch him when he was on at 12:30 on... whatever that was, NBC.
NBC, wow.
So that's how old I am, and that's how long ago I've been watching him since. But seeing the Malala thing and seeing how she's, having two daughters myself, and seeing how she's very much about protecting women's rights, and women need to get education and things like that in countries that don't allow that. And then here's Letterman cracking off about this and about that. And so that was where I was from in the first episode. That's why I stopped watching it. And then when I watched it with you, I was a little bit more, perhaps more open-minded, because you're a very open and giving person. So I was infected by that.
Infected? What?
I mean, influenced.
Oh, now people are going to...
But don't worry, I got some penicillin and it went away.
Oh, okay.
So I enjoyed that episode more than I did previously, but it still was a little bit jarring. And we watched it out of chronological order, so we watched the Jay-Z version before we watched the Malala version together, their episode. So that was my take on the Malala episode. What was your take?
I mean, I enjoyed hearing her talk more about her experiences, because I don't really know much about her. I mean, obviously everybody in the world knows this poor, 12, 14-year-old girl was shot in the head by the Taliban for daring to want to go to school.
Yeah.
So I know kind of the very rudimentary aspects of her story, but I'd never actually heard her talk. I'd never watched her Nobel Prize speech or anything. So in that sense, I enjoyed hearing more about it. And Letterman even seemed like he was doing like a very elementary interview. Like it seemed like it was more geared toward people like me who didn't really know a whole lot about it.
Right.
It wasn't some kind of in-depth geopolitical, socioeconomic discussion about facts or anything.
It was introduction to Malala, essentially.
Right, exactly. So that was good. But at the same time, she seemed very, maybe uncomfortable is too strong a word, but just very kind of...
She didn't know what to think of him.
Right. Like, I think she was expecting a little bit more. Like, maybe she was expecting more of a discussion of that sort of thing, and instead it wasn't, and she seemed kind of like... Yeah, just kind of awkward, not knowing what to expect from the funny guy. And then, the pre-taped segments at Oxford, where she goes to school, were a little bit...
So he went on a tour with her. She's a tour guide at Oxford, apparently.
Which, is that even really... Does she even really do that, though? Like, I mean, because I was wondering if that would, like, in reality shows, which I really hate to compare Malala to, like, some bad Kardashian reality show.
This is where we are in the culture world these days.
Exactly. But a lot of those reality shows, spoiler alert for those of you who aren't aware, they're not real. Like, they're all...
They're staged.
They're staged.
Yeah.
They're storylined. Even if there's not a script, like, they have plot points and discussion points that they have to hit. Mm-hmm. And... Because clearly...
So next thing you're going to say is that Santa Claus is not real.
Your child might be listening to this podcast. What are you doing? Don't listen to that.
The whole reality TV thing for her.
So since clearly they couldn't go back to Pakistan to see where she came from before she got shot and moved to the UK, like all they could really do was go to England. And not that I'm slagging off England, but I just kind of wondered if she's really a tour guide at Oxford, or if they really couldn't figure out what to do since they couldn't go to Pakistan. And so they were like, oh, let's just invite like a dozen teen girls from the various surrounding areas to take this tour, and Dave can play up how awkward and old he is around them.
And that further was evidence of how awkward it was. Like, they didn't get him either.
Right.
Those girls that were there. So Letterman is, back in the day when Letterman was on TV all the time, on traditional cable TV or national over-the-air TV, people knew who he was, and he was a celebrity, and he was making noise and making news and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But now he's not really relevant. When you think about it, it's been a long time since he's been on TV in the grand scheme of our media consumption.
Right, 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, I mean, that's been ages since he was a mainstream celebrity on TV, and it's only been a couple of years.
Yeah,
but
maybe 3 years max since he quote-unquote retired. And part of it is probably that, but also, I mean, they were in the UK, and these are like 17-year-old girls. So 17-year-old girls aren't...
That's what, like, even 3 years ago, are they watching Letterman?
Right, exactly. When they were in whatever the British version of middle school is. So,
It's probably smarter and better dressed. Right. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that segment, but I came around a little bit, and...
There were some funny moments in those segments. Like, it wasn't all just like us sitting here cringing, covering our heads with the pillows, like feeling secondhand embarrassment. Like, there were definitely some funny parts to the Oxford segments, but it just was a no generally for me.
And I think that the other, maybe what they were trying to do is bring across that Malala has a sense of humor, which I came across a couple of times in her own. She has it, but I think she has a different sense of humor that Letterman does.
Right.
And so it didn't really jive, but maybe that was one of the reasons that she agreed to do the show, also to get her message out probably too in a larger platform, but to show that she's not all standing on a soapbox all the time, as much as she very well would deserve to be, and everybody would respect if she did. But it looked like she was, every now and then she'd come out, she'd get a joke that Letterman said, and she would come back with her own joke. Right. And it would be funny, and it would be worthwhile. But all the other jarring moments were just kind of really disruptive, I think, to the rhythm.
Yeah. And that probably is part of what they were doing. You're right. Because, I mean, she's like 20 years old, and she's been through so freaking much. Right. Like, I'm twice her age, even though I'm only 29, and I haven't been through nearly... I mean, I haven't been shot in the face by religious extremists, like, nor, knock wood, do I hope to ever be. But yeah, I mean, so I can definitely see them trying to portray her in a lighter light, so to speak, than... you're right.
So the JZ episode, I know very little about him other than what I read in link text and connections to Beyonce. I'm not really into his music. I don't know a lot about it, but I'm not really into his kind of music. I do know a lot about what I know about him. I've read in Rolling Stone over the years, back when I used to subscribe to that magazine, and I thought he was more of a mogul than a musician, just based on what I was reading about him. But I didn't know anything about his personality. And in that episode with Letterman, he was a really charming guy.
Yeah.
I really was impressed with how he seemed very affable, and he gave just as much as he took with Letterman. And Letterman seemed to let on a bit that they had a relationship or something like that, like they knew each other at some point along the way. No, not in a socializing every Friday night rave or anything like that. But
oh my God, I want to see Letterman like go into like the Rage or at Jay-Z and Beyonce's house in Scarsdale.
So the tape segment we should talk about, but that reminds me of the tape segment in the JZ episode, which was
brutal.
You want to talk about that? Because I've done a lot of talking.
Okay.
You talk about that.
So basically the common theme among all our Letterman episodes is that we don't like the pre-tape segments.
Yes.
They're just jarring, and so in the
They feel like filler.
Totally. In the Jay-Z episode, so instead of going to the Marcy Projects in Brooklyn where Jay-Z is from,
and what she references right off the top and talks a lot about.
Right. Or going to the Jay-Z's house and meeting Beyonce and the kids or whatever. He goes to Rick Rubin's recording studio in Malibu, which was just like a house that got converted, and there's an old like VW bus in the backyard that was also converted into a soundproof studio.
It's an old studio, yeah.
And that segment I thought was interesting because, I mean, that's really cool to see like a VW bus from the 60s that's now a recording studio. And they said that they mixed like half of Kanye's Yeezus album in the VW bus. So that was pretty cool. But then the other segments at the Malibu house were this probably 20-something white girl country singer and this all-white 20-something hipster guy country band, and
they were definitely not from New York.
No, and they were I believe Dalt's exact quote was, "They could not have gotten people more opposite from Jay-Z for this segment." Like, I understand the idea behind the segment, like going to a recording studio and seeing how the sausage is made, but it just,
it was not relatable at all to the two. So it seemed like it was a David Letterman orchestrated hit. So let's get two things that have to do with music.
Yeah.
And we'll put them together. Right. And meanwhile, you're like Jay-Z in this, she was a fantastic singer.
Right. She had a beautiful voice.
And she was talented in the band, had some things going on that were good too.
And Letterman clearly had a little crush on her because she was a beautiful lady too. But
and there was a funny bit in there where she starts singing the song that they were recording right in front of him, and he was flabbergasted. He didn't know that like the technology would allow this for him not to be in the sound booth with them or whatever.
Right.
And that was jarring. That would have been a nice little segment by itself.
Right.
But within the context of Jay-Z, so Jay-Z's talking about race. He's talking about his upbringing. He's talking about his dad was always angry and seeking his dad's brother's killer.
Right.
At the drop of a hat, he would be gone for days on end trying to hunt this guy down and find him. And then you go to the cast from "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Right.
And it just didn't make any sense. I mean, it just was not. And Letterman was just out of place, completely out of place in there.
Yeah, he was completely uncomfortable. And like I said, I understand the concept of going to a recording studio. And I didn't get our crack research team to look this up before we started recording. I also understand the concept of talking to Rick Rubin. He's a very well-known producer. I believe he's probably worked with Jay-Z. He's definitely worked with Kanye. So why don't you talk about working with Jay-Z and Kanye? Why don't you talk about how hip-hop and rap have changed in the past 20, 30, 40 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, instead of let's throw these, cute young white country singers in there and have them record a song in front of Dave. Like,
I just didn't get it.
And especially because I was like you. I thought Jay-Z was a great interview. I thought he came across so well. He was so charming and funny and, affable. And I just would have listened to an hour of Jay-Z talk.
Me too.
Instead of throwing that other stuff in there.
And it seemed like there were a lot more of those segments in that particular segment, like a lot more of those pre-taped things where we were talking about earlier. Like, it seemed like it was where you would have a traditional commercial break.
Right.
There was that segment going back to the studio with this white band. And it really interrupted the flow of the interview with Jay-Z.
And it seemed like the editing on that one, aside from throwing in the recording studio segments, was very choppy.
Yeah.
Like, I can't remember what they were talking about, but they were talking about something, and then suddenly Dave just turns and he wants to talk about the use of the N-word in hip-hop music, and that was just very choppy and edited poorly, but I still enjoyed the episode overall. Like, that might be my favorite one of the four of them so far. Like, so far, Jay-Z and Obama I've really enjoyed, and then Clooney and Malala, like, eh.
I think that it's like when a band makes a double album and it's ostentatious and it's something that they've done after they've had a big hit album. This next album is always a double album. And usually that double album is better if you pared it down to an album's worth of songs.
Right.
So where I'm going with this is that I think that all these episodes would have been much stronger if you take out those segments that are taped elsewhere and not in the auditorium where the interviews are done. Right. Give me 45 minutes. It doesn't have to be 50 minutes or like, it doesn't have to be a traditional TV show length. Give me what it's worth.
Right.
So if there's a Jay-Z interview that's 42 minutes long, then that's good enough. Like, let's just roll with that, because he was just really, I wanted to hear more from him.
Right, totally. And I'm not really a Jay-Z and Beyonce fan. Like, I don't want the Hive to come after me for saying this, but I think and I don't know much about Jay-Z's music, so I'm really not commenting on like his influence on rap and hip hop, but I think Beyonce is a little bit overhyped in the media for being a pop star, and I think the two of them together definitely play the media game to sell tickets and to sell.
They're good at what they do.
Right, they're very good at what they do, and I'm not really a fan of the two of them, just their media machine. But I really, really enjoyed his interview, and I would have listened to him talk for an hour or 42 minutes, and it's Netflix, so it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to fit into that network TV 60-minute box. Like, you can do whatever you want. You're David Letterman, and you're on Netflix. Come on.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I'm wondering if that was in his contract that they shows have to be a certain length or something like that. But I'm on board with that, and I think that the thing that what I'm forever doing when I'm goofing off and you're working hard elsewhere.
That's not the way it goes.
And I'm always looking for something that is quickly consumable. That's not an hour and a half, 2 hour long movie.
Right.
It's not a series that I need to binge watch for 4 days. Like, I'm constantly looking for something. Like, that's why I watch the old episodes of The Twilight Zone. They're 22 minutes long. I can bang out 2 or 3 of them depending on how much time allows and how lazy I feel. And so where I'm going with this is that I think that those episodes could be a 30-minute episode. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. In this day and age, it doesn't have to be like, would you rather have somebody wanting more after 30 minutes, or as we're finished watching these shows, it's like, yeah, I think that's good. I got enough of the white band in Rick Rubin's studio.
Right, totally. Yeah, I agree. As always, I completely agree with everything you say.
And you don't have to. The other thing that I noticed during the Malala episode in particular, but also in the Jay-Z episode, is that Letterman, I think, is still in the Late Show with David Letterman mode, where he's interviewing somebody for 5 to 8 minutes, and he's trying to squeeze everything in with commercials. And I noticed this with his interviewing style, is that I see Malala pauses, and then he jumps in thinking that she doesn't have anything else to say, but actually she's giving it more thought, and she's going to say something else. And I noticed that with Jay-Z too, that he was the way he was looking at Letterman, sort of like to the side, and then every now and then he would go like this with his hand, like he was going to say something else, and Letterman would interrupt and change the conversation. So I think that you could also extend these interviews by Letterman just sitting there a little bit,
right? Totally,
and just letting people talk. Like, that's the sign of a good interviewer is just sitting there and people are so afraid of silence.
Exactly.
But sometimes silence is good because it gets the answer that you have not heard before.
I totally agree with you. I will say I do like that we are learning more about Letterman. Like, he seems to be, because when he was still on CBS and NBC, like, he didn't really talk too much about his personal life. He was very private. Like, his mom would come on, you know, and then there was that whole thing where he banged his intern or whatever and he got caught doing that. But otherwise, you know, like you said, he was a very, very private guy. So I do like that he's coming out of his shell and he's talking about his family and stuff. So that's good, you know, and also it does facilitate more discussion between people because I'm talking about my kid. Well, now you're talking about your kids, and now we're talking about our fears for them as they grow up and our dreams for them as they grow up. So I do like that does facilitate discussion. And
I don't think that Letterman is incapable of doing what I'm talking about. I think he is, because the way he went into asking JZ about making mistakes that could have ruined his marriage, which is obviously in reference to some sort of affair, I guess, or some sort of allegation of bad behavior.
Well, yeah, this is where the Jay-Z Beyonce media machine comes in, and we won't get into that. You know,
so, but there was a part there that, not knowing really either side of the story too well, I know Letterman's probably better than I know Jay-Z's, but there was a long question that Letterman asked about, I think I've done something and I completely regret it and I've screwed it up. And he was very personal about it. It was the most personal I've ever seen him about something like that. And he threw it to Jay-Z and was sort of like, do you have anything similar in your that you want to talk about? And Jay-Z handled it. He didn't admit to anything. I noticed he kind of went around the answer, but or the question with his own answer. But he did touch on it a little bit, and it was to me encouraging because that was more of a journalistic moment that I wanted, more than him going to Alabama.
Right.
Like, it was, you're an interviewer. Why don't you interview and not necessarily hold everybody's feet to the fire,
right,
but at least ask the questions that are in other people's minds and use your access, because obviously Jay-Z doesn't do a lot of interviews. And obviously Malala doesn't do a lot of high-profile interviews like that. That
was actually the one time where I could kind of, and maybe it was just me, maybe you didn't see this, but like when Letterman started talking about it and you knew where it was going, like you could kind of see Jay-Z's guard go up a little bit, like, you know, like, I don't really want to talk about like getting caught screwing around on my wife, you know?
Right.
And maybe,
but he asked the question to Letterman's credit.
He did. Yeah, Letterman asked the question and Jay-Z did answer it in a non-specifics.
He danced around it.
He did. He danced around it. There you go.
So, but do you think there was anything equivalent that he could have asked Obama?
About,
like, a hard question that he didn't ask?
Or
George Clooney?
I don't know what. I know why I'd ask Clooney. Like, why do you have to? No. This is not the Clooney episode.
No, it's not a Clooney episode. Okay. Sorry, I took us off track there. But anyway,
we're known for getting off track. If you've listened to any of our previous episodes.
That's what makes our podcast so interesting. It's like Wiki. You go on Wiki and then you click on this, and then you go over there, and then you click on that and you go over there, and it's nothing that you started with.
You're down the rabbit hole.
So, do we want to give an overall take on the Letterman show before we close this episode of Cocoa and Adults?
You mean all four together, or just
generally? We have one more left, right?
There's at least one more left. The Tina Fey episode is coming out in May. Right. I don't know if there is another one after that because our crack research team didn't look that up. But overall, I'd say the four together, I'd give them like a B minus. Yeah, maybe.
I think I'd be a good B because I like the lineup of guests that he's had.
Yeah, he's not getting the Kardashians. He's getting heavy hitters politically and pop culturally.
The one time that I saw the Letterman show live, he had Don Rickles on. So there's no...
That's amazing.
There's no Don Rickles equivalent in this lineup, right? Like, even Tina Fey, whom we have not seen, obviously, she's a number one star too. So like, he's getting all the big acts coming in there. Yeah. And there are various, we've got politics, we got music, we got acting, we've got civil rights, we've got all sorts of things that are big topics, and he's getting all the big key... really, when you think about it, I know you're not a huge George Clooney fan, but who else could you get as an actor who would move the needle as much as he does? Like, George Clooney! Like, a lot of people are going to want to watch that.
Right. He's A+++ list. Right. I mean, he's been A+++ list for 20 years.
Yeah. So. And among other, like, a big demographic. A lot of people are going to want to watch that sort of thing. So I think that the Booker is doing a great job, and I think Letterman is doing I think a B job. I think he's getting used to his new pair of shoes, and he's walking around in them a little bit. I think if they cut those segments out or
change them up, like even Letterman doesn't have to go to the studio. Like, send a camera crew with Jay-Z and have Jay-Z go to the studio, and Jay-Z talks to Rick Rubin, and maybe Jay-Z lays down a sick beat,
I've been fascinated to see those two guys talk, because they've worked before in the past, and they're titans of their industry. Like, I'm pretty sure that Dave Letterman did not know how much of an influence Rick Rubin has had on modern music. Like, I just... And maybe that's part of the charm. Maybe that's part of the, like, going in like everybody else, kind of ignoramus, and into this situation. But, like, this is a guy who's produced a lot of mainstream acts and turned around acts, and he's worked with Dylan, he's worked with Beastie Boys, like everybody, right? So he's a big deal, Rick Rubin. So having segments like that, I think that would have been great, to have Jay-Z talk to Rick Rubin about music.
Right.
I mean, how awesome would that be?
Right, and send a camera crew to the UK and have Malala give the camera crew a tour of Oxford, and then have her take them to the hospital where they reconstructed her head after she got shot. Like, that would be a lot more interesting and informative than Letterman following around a bunch of 16-year-old girls who are laughing to be nice, but when they laugh at all, when it's not crickets.
Completely uncomfortable with the situation.
Right.
And I think that having the segment that they did with the guided tour, it just seemed too much like the old Letterman shows. Him hanging around and being a bit of a goofball,
right?
And it just didn't fit. It just was not like him telling a joke and the kids not getting it. That would have been perfect on the old show. But on this new show, not so much.
If you're trying to be a little bit heavier and not just talk to the Kardashians or whoever the CBS bookers tell you that you have to have on. Right. So this is Netflix. If you're interesting, hire Coco and Daltz to come in and revamp season 2 of My Next Guest Needs No Introduction.
We will do it. We will help you out. And I wanted to issue a correction. I said that Rick Rubin worked with Bob Dylan. Actually, it was Jacob Dylan. So a little bit different on the gravitas scale, but I will say that Rick Rubin has worked with AC/DC, Aerosmith, Red Hot Chili Peppers, The Cult, Tom Petty, ZZ Top, or, again...
ZZ Top.
Thank you.
What about Double Z Top?
Double Z Top.
Yeah. I don't know.
The Beards like to get together. That's Rick Rubin.
This is when you know that Coco and Daltz need to stop recording.
Okay.
Because they're cracking themselves up with them jokes.
I think... So thank you again for joining us on the podcast.
Episode Sweet 16.
Sweet 16. We hope there'll be at least another 16 to go.
I'm sure there will.
For another week, I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz.